Namaskar and welcome to Daily Global Insights, episode 302. A shout out to our viewers to like our program so that it can reach its maximum potential. Today is the 29th of December 2021, and here's what is happening around the world. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been silent on the Chinese human rights issue against the Uyghurs and let alone the treatment in Hong Kong. Now, having attended BRI summit and endorsing it, he is expected to attend the Beijing Olympics when many Western nations have announced a diplomatic boycott. So, what is the UN's message to the world? Is he not representative of UN? Let's find out from Sridharji. Sridharji, namaskar, and your thoughts on what the UN is doing, sir.
Namaskar, good morning, good day to everybody, and happy to be back, after a week, and we really kick off with a very interesting topic, which is United Nations at the epicenter of yet another controversy after the WHO as far as dealing with the Chinese are concerned. Well, I think that there's a very clear message that the world is asking, which is to say, has United Nations folded directly under the direction of the CCP and the Chinese regime, Mr. Xi Jinping, especially when many countries have passed resolutions against Chinese behavior, be it in Hong Kong, in terms of the way the pro-democratic leadership has been treated. The Uyghur Islamic community or Muslim community, the human rights violations there. You seem to have, been totally silent on those issues, and on the contrary, you attended the Belt and Road Initiative conference, effectively endorsing the program that Mr. Xi Jinping has launched. When there has been a number of criticism. It is almost called as the debt trap BRI strategy, where countries have folded, yielding to the Chinese pressure. And now when you have, including United Nations and many P5 nations, including some of the Asian nations like Japan and so on, doing a diplomatic boycott in condemning the Chinese behavior, United Nations says it will be present at the Olympics. So it is not clearly sending a message that is reflective and representative of the pro-democratic Western nations, but it seems to have its own message, which is not consistent with the Charter of the UN. That is the message that is coming from the democratic world, sir.
And China has repeatedly warned Indonesia to halt an oil and natural gas development project in the South China Sea, north of Natuna Islands, claiming infringement on territorial waters. It sends its Coast Guard and patrol boats, similar to their aspersions in Senkaku Island off the coast of Japan. Sridharji, this is back to saber rattling again, sir.
Well, back to saber rattling, and this has been the theme that people had mentioned, which is it's only a matter of time. It's not just Taiwan, it is Senkaku. Once that is done, then maybe it is Senkaku is Japan, and then maybe the next is Indonesia, maybe next is Australia. So effectively, it has told the Indonesians that they have no authority to violate the sovereignty that belongs to China, when actually those territorial waters belong to Indonesia. So it seems like China is continuing to flout and threaten the people. It sent its naval vessels and patrol boats threatening the people who were in the exploration in that region.
And Nicaragua seizes former Taiwan embassy and hands it over to China after it severed ties amid protests from Taiwan. Sridharji, this is out of the park. I don't know what US is doing, sir. It is right in its backyard.
I think that we discussed this few DGIs ago. China is applying three different types of strategy. First and foremost, it threatens the sovereign. I mean, as we saw in the case of South China Sea and as we saw in the Indonesian waters of Nakano, Senkaku, Taiwan, etc. then it does the other thing, which is effectively coerces and puts pressure on countries which are sympathetic towards Taiwan. That's the second type of strategy. The third is that it forces some of them supporting to turn against Taiwan, as has happened in the case of Nicaragua. Nicaragua not only switched its allegiance from Taiwan to China, but it went one step further, which is raided where Taiwanese embassy was and handed it over to China to add insult to the injury. I mean, there's nothing more demeaning. This is supposed to be a diplomatic enclave and not an area where nations are supposed to encroach. But no, what you're talking about is communist nations. They don't follow any protocols. That's what you're seeing in Nicaragua.
And Japan's defense minister Nobuo Kishi has agreed to launch a military hotline with China in 2022. This was announced by the Japanese Foreign Ministry based on talks between Mr. Kishi and his counterpart Wei Fenghe. Sridharji, this hotline is always useful because we know that Japan has aspirations over Senkaku Islands. And see, yesterday we had a very long discussion about China's slow melt with Lieutenant General Ravi Shankar. And I urge all our viewers to watch this because there are a lot of things that he brought up in a systematic, methodical way. We have done this thing a few times. Sridharji kicked the ball rolling many months ago when we talked about Mekong River, its exploitation by China. Then General Ravi Shankar talked about Brahmaputra, and yesterday's topic is about what is happening inside China. Now you see that Japan has set this hotline with China. So there is a certain concern in Japan also as to what China might want to do. Sridharji, this all has to do with who is the bigger bully in the world.
Well, I think it's China believes that the world must obey and listen to the orders of Mr. Xi Jinping and the CCP Politburo. Remember that they are a command and control regime. They have been a command and control regime for years. So what we are seeing is now that being extended and being enforced upon nations that are around its neighborhood or that are outside of its neighborhood when it deems that it gives them aid, and then effectively when the aid is at draconian kind of rates, and when people default, as has happened in the case of Sri Lanka or some of the African nations, they threaten them with sovereignty issues and try to even usurp those islands, usurp the territories which they believe now belongs to them by virtue of the debt. In the case of Japan, I think that Japan is clearly worried. There was also apparently a cyber attack or an attack on some of its space assets yesterday. So China is concerned that it cannot just be retaliatory, but open a hotline so they can pick up the phone and speak to people and get to the bottom of the issues and see whether there's a resolution. Those of you who have been following what's happening with the Indian army as well as the Chinese army on the Chinese incursions in the India's border, be it up north or be it in the Arunachal Pradesh, you can see that there is a hotline. There's, I don't know how many times those armed forces have met, but generally China doesn't kind of listen. So at least Japan is saying, okay, I'll try as well and see whether it works. So it's good they have the line open, but I just don't think based on history that anything will come out of it.
And the United States and Russia will be holding security talks over Ukraine arms control on January 10th amidst Putin's repeated pleas for guarantees on safety. Sridharji, again, I must tell all our viewers that there was a discussion about this on Sunday with Professor M.D. Nalapat, and I urge you all to watch that. That's also on PGurus. He had a slightly different take on what is Russia's interest in Ukraine. Sridharji, this thing, how do you see this thing play out? Because one of the things I came to know that I did not know before was that Ukraine is still 40% ethnic Russian.
It's very true. Very true. So there is in this erstwhile Russian blocs, which includes Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, some of the Central Asian republics, Eastern Bloc, you have a good chunk of the legacy Russian population. As far as Ukraine is concerned, as you pointed out, there's close to 40% of the population, and something similar in Crimea. They speak Russian and they have a sympathy towards the old Russian regime. All that set aside, I think Russia is genuinely concerned because I watched the press briefing conducted by Vladimir Putin, basically saying, if there are no security guarantees and NATO is sweeping, right in my border, then, I will be concerned and I will do what I need to do to take care of myself. Now, what exactly he is trying to extract is effectively a safe and secure gateway and passage for his interests around that region. That's one thing. And the second thing is obviously the selling of his gas, and the world not, world being sympathetic to whatever type of behavior Russia engages in. And this is where I think the NATO and the Western nations are saying, you have to follow a rules-based approach. If you want gas, then we will take the Nord Stream 2 pipeline gas, but then you got to, be following the world order, which I just don't think, at least they, in the case of China, it's unilateral. In Russia, at least this fellow is talking, Mr. Putin is talking, is trying to see whether he can negotiate an outcome. I just doubt whether the world is going to toe the line, but he is a negotiator. He is he has been at the helm of the power, and he comes from the old KGB, Cold War times. I'm sure he may be able to find some kind of a solution, as he did with Angela Merkel.
And Afghan anti-Taliban forces seek support from Biden and get nothing. Clear indications on Biden's priorities. In another indication, the number of airstrikes under Biden has dramatically reduced by 54% with shifting focus. Sridharji, we have talked about this often, that there are up to 44 people in the Biden administration who are Pakistan sympathizers. At least in the case of Afghanistan, looks like their writ is running large.
It seems that way, sir. This relates to that Panjshir Valley. You remember the resistance movement up in the mountains. I think there was a fantastic PGurus program with Major General Bakshi, who laid out, if you recall, I think that, that's a great interview around the importance of the Panjshir and how it is a difficult terrain in which these so-called mountain warriors are able to hold the positions and then surrender. So apparently they have made the pro-democracy forces or the anti-Taliban forces, have made tremendous progress. But that there is, as you're all aware, that there is a pro-sympathetic support from who else but some very friendly Afghan neighbors who are armed and who have a well-regimented machinery. And they expected Biden administration to come to the rescue when these fellows were being persecuted on the brink of victory. But nothing has happened. No support has come. No international coalition has been supportive in terms of the cause of the pro-democracy forces, letting us all be, ponder what exactly is the agenda and why United States spent more than 2 decades there when its agenda seems to be something different today.
In US domestic politics, Senator Joe Manchin is now trying to make peace with his Democratic Party colleagues over the killing of the mammoth social welfare and climate bills and is now prepared to dump Trump-era tax cuts. Sridharji, what magic wand was waved in front of Senator Joe Manchin that made him do this 180-degree volte-face?
Well, I think that it's all in politics. There's only one agenda, sir, which is namely how do you hold on to the power and how do you win the sympathy of at least some members of the party. I thought that he was gaining traction from some of the other Democratic colleagues, notably from Alaska and other areas, to resist this outrageous taxation as well as the social policy, social welfare policy, which was going to bleed and create inflation. Then now what he does the flip, which is to say, okay, you don't want, we don't want to pass a $1.75 trillion bill. What am I going to do? I've supported the stimulus, but I'm not supporting the expansionary budget. But I'm going to do the tax cuts so that there is going to be more taxes coming out, which exactly what Trump tried to correct and saw 3.5 years of economic resurgence. And now we have inflation, plus we are going to have taxes. And probably the progressives think that, okay, I got something, but I just don't think the progressives are going to be satisfied with rolling back of the tax cuts. And Mr. Manchin is going to get immediately kudos, but he thinks that he will. And he's embarked on this very fatalistic approach.
Sridharji, I think he's going to have a lot of difficulty explaining his stand to his constituents whenever it's time for re-election. I'm sure they're going to say, Mr. Flip-Flop, there was John Kerry and then there is Joe Manchin. So it's going to be very interesting. It was very, very surprising what he has done. But be that as it may, maybe the progressives see the writing on the wall that their writ is not going to go beyond 2022. So let us try and do here and there a few more things and then claim victory. This is just my guess, of course, and we will wait and see how things play out. In Biden's first year, the illegal immigration to United States outpaces the population of major US cities, potentially creating longer-term social and security tensions. Over 2 million attempts and several 100,000 have been released into United States cities. We have said this thing before, how they have kind of taken them and randomly sampled them into all sorts of places. And now I don't know how they are going to unearth those people. We've been saying this thing, we were dismayed. In fact, after the story came in our and DJI, we saw several US senators go to the border, take videos, or what have you. I mean, that one wonders, we are the tip of the spear in some of these stories. Sridharji, where do you think this is going to end in 2022? Let's say there is a Congress and Senate majority for Republican. Can they undo this damage?
No, they can stop further damage. I just don't think they can undo the present damage. If you recall, this we already have close to 10 or 11 million illegals going through from the Obama period into Trump, now into Biden. Close to 2 million people, there have been attempts just in 12 months. And once they are into the mainstream US, it is very difficult to what you call deport them, deport them. We have a legal system in the United States, which mitigates and prevents, and it's a slow process. And people have to have patience to pursue these cases. So I think that what you're going to witness is that this is a done job. The only good thing that is that when in the 2022 elections, should there be a reversal, then at least you may begin to see reform in the election laws and that kind of stuff, and seeing some preventative measures being put in place in terms of validating and identifying and vetting the security and the identity and credentials of the people. If not, all these guys are going to be unilaterally rolled in. One of the news items, which may not be relevant but very important, is apparently in Texas, many people who are on payroll, they are all on payroll. These are people, criminals, because of very sympathetic Democratic judges. This is what the report says, are committing crimes again back when they are on payroll. So the story here is that when you have these illegals wandering around and you have no enforcement, what is the mechanism for you to stop further crime, especially if there is no security vetting. I think this is the biggest concern that everybody has, and this is one of the reasons why that we have seen and we have reported in DGI a very large set of incidences around the democratic controlled mayoral cities in United States.
And Biden signs the much delayed 770 billion defense bill with a 2.6% increase in pay hikes and a much needed supplies to fight the resurgent Chinese. This is something that was expected, but I don't know why it got delayed so much. I mean, this is essential. Sridharji, in US defense, there are still unresolved questions about what really happened in South China Sea to USS Connecticut, and also how well is US equipped to tackle hypersonic warfare. I mean, I can go on, sir, 3, 4, whatever happened to that Nashville bombing. Nobody has said anything about who did it. US is normally very good at reconstructing and telling exactly what happened down to the last screw. We've seen that thing also thrown in a dustbin. What exactly do you think the United States needs? Is this 2.6% enough, in your opinion?
Well, they were talking about cutting the budget. On one hand, Biden has withdrawn. There's been a series of withdrawals, as you all are aware. The most conspicuous of which is Afghanistan. He left Afghanistan, leaving behind billions of dollars of worth, much criticized. Thanks to very sympathetic liberal media, the whole issue has been watered down. Then he withdrew from Iraq. He withdrew from parts of Syria. So you have had unilateral withdrawals of the US forces. The plausible explanation that was given by the Biden administration is all their efforts are focused on the single biggest threat to the nation, in their view, that is China. So to put their efforts into South China Sea, as well as in defending Taiwan. And you can't do that by cutting budgets and cutting the payroll of the armed forces. You really need to increase the budget if you really want to sharpen the functioning of the U.S. Army. And U.S. Army, again, we have been covering in DGI, has made several statements that it really needs to lift its game up, especially around the space technology, especially around the hypersonic technology, especially around the cyber warfare, etc. So when you need augmentation, modest increase in the budget is not just going to address the security needs of the United States in defending itself or its strategic allies.
And Indian economy growth likely to be sustained at a record 9% for the fiscal years 2022 and 23, says an economic report. Rising consumption will push the capacity utilization beyond the threshold of 75%, says the report. Sridharji, for our viewers, this is very good news, but can you provide us with some details, sir? Whose report is this and how reliable is it?
Well, I think this is a fairly reliable report by an industry body. I forget the name of the person. She's fairly, she and her team, I think. It's an independent research, which has produced data which points out that the economic forecast is expected to be 9%. This is in alignment with many of the people who have done a very similar kind of economic forecast predictions. We again covered in DGI the just retiring, exiting chief economic advisor has made similar observations and predictions based on his economic policy release. Now, this particular report goes one step further, where they're saying that the economic expansion is visible, and that is being driven by returning economic growth resulting from the unfolding or the winding down of pandemic, which has had its effect, that has increased the consumption. So the consumption drives the expansion. The expansion results in much more capital intensive programs by the industry. So they say that the tailwind effects of that will be felt in 2022. and we can certainly provide a link or more details in the PGurus channel. But the report is very reliable and to the extent of data that has been provided. So.
And record food grains production likely in 2022. And for the first 21 days in December, exports have risen 36%. India is confident of meeting $400 billion export target. I think this is for the year 2021, isn't it, sir?
Correct. That's correct. Again, this is another one that we have been covering progressively. If you're not following, follow Mr. Piyush Goyal on Kuku or Ku or any of these things. You can keep seeing that every day he is bellowing away at the numbers. And clearly, I think that the export growth has been triggered by opportunities that has arisen from some of the pandemic issues, which has impacted many nations and their production plants being shut down. And also fairly to say that India has taken a much more proactive approach in terms of expanding its footprint in some of the domains.
And India has now approved 2 new vaccines to expand its inventory to 8 vaccines and 4 treatments in its battle against COVID and Omicron. Corbavax and Covovax are the 2 new vaccines that received emergency approval. Sridharji, we also already wrote a detailed article in PGurus about this. Viewers can read all the details about these 2 and more in that article. But Sridharji, this augurs well for India because they can cover the people even more effectively now.
Yes, I think that there's still a tremendous amount of skepticism. We tweeted, if you recall, based on the data. We also tweeted citing Dr. Panagaria's article in terms of the vaccinations. But still, there is some amount of skepticism that whether there would be a resurgence, in India. But the fact that today, close to 85% of the eligible universe is vaccinated with 1 vaccine, and close to 54% of the eligible universe is vaccinated with fully vaccinated. Given you have now more testing available, plus that oxygen that was at a shortage during the resurgence in the second wave, that gap has been filled. And now you have 8 plus 4 different programs ranging for different ages, including oral pills that they are experimenting with. I think that India will be able to, I believe, to such a great extent, mitigate the issues arising from this rapid surge that has engulfed the world as far as the Omicron is concerned.
And Russia says failure to certify Nord Stream 2 is not an option and warns of dire consequences. We've been hearing this for a while now, Sridharji.
But they keep, I think, either Vladimir Putin or the deputy prime minister or the prime minister or Mr. Putin himself. I think this is the issue. The issue is this access and conduit into Europe for Russia's natural gas is the centerpiece of Russia's kind of saber rattling. Their security is they do not want to have NATO near it. They want to have unilateral access into Europe and be the pivot for supplying of gas. And they want to have, for any of their incursions, no Western actions to be perpetuated. For example, Belarus comes to your mind, Moldova comes to your mind, some of the things around Georgia comes to your mind, some of their actions around Crimea and Ukraine comes to your mind. There, Russia wants to assert its rights to make sure that its natural gas flows, assert its rights to make sure that some of the Central Asian, some of the neighboring areas continue to be under its influence so that some of these nations don't pose a threat to the Russian survival or the Russian belligerence.
And Belarus makes a constitutional change to extend the rule of the despotic president Lukashenko. Sridharji, has that illegal immigration where they were flying in planes from Turkey stopped now?
No, I think that it has reduced, but it has not completely stopped. They have not repatriated the people who are stuck. I believe some of the people, either from Iran or from Syria, have gone back out of their own accord, having not gained passage into Europe. It's clearly it has. He is not bringing more and more new people. Whether it has completely stopped remains a question mark. Now, we talked about, just in the previous point, we talked about sympathetic regimes to Russia. Lukashenko comes right on top of the list, and which is the reason why, again, we have covered in DGI how Russia comes to its rescue. So Russia tries to control the agenda using these surrogate regimes which are sympathetic to it. If you study the map, Belarus is an important conduit for that pipe to go through. Ukraine is an important country for that pipe to get through into mainland Europe. Ukraine is not supportive, whereas Belarus is very sympathetic, and Russia comes to its rescue, albeit it using these types of techniques and non-democratic regimes at the helm holding on to the power. So I think that this guy has not stopped, sir, and he has only, like Mr. Xi Jinping, has permanently, put himself at the power, compromising the democratic process.
The most recent gruesome attack in Congo demonstrates the rise of Islamic State and expansion across Africa. In a surprise move, the Israeli President Naftali Bennett voiced support for a nuclear deal with Iran, but expressed considerable skepticism whether a constructive outcome could emerge from the current talks. This again is a surprise. I thought Israel was very firmly against Iran getting nuclear capabilities, CG.
I'm very surprised. When this news hit my desk, which is namely to say that Mr. Bennett is saying, well, I'm sympathetic to the negotiations, but guess what? Nothing is going to come out of it. And why you guys are pursuing still? While that, firstly, the statement was surprising. Secondly, there's no surprise in what he's saying by way of outcome. There is neither any surprise that Israel is preparing itself to take actions, irrespective of what the Western world or the world will do for the Iranian transigence around its nuclear aspirations. So therefore, I think that path will continue. So we have consistently maintained that position in DGI. I think before we transition, one important point is that we have been a little silent on the Sahel region, but that whole area has been witnessing, progressive kind of resurgence in the terrorist activities, and this Congo is back at the helm. If you recall, United States put both in Congo and Sudan significant amount of efforts to get the pro-democracy movements going, but it looks like that is all in vain.
And now let's take a look at markets. The Santa Claus rally continued as markets rise with positive sentiments as S&P outperformed the much sought after Nasdaq for the first time since 2016. When S&P rises, Sridharji, that means there has been a broad-based stock market improvement, sir. Almost all companies seem to have done well.
Over 85% of the companies in the S&P have outperformed in their earnings, primarily driven by, in my view, three factors. First factor is obviously low interest rates has helped them. That has been a positive factor in the margins as well as cost of funding their expansionary programs. That's number one. The second, to some extent, that a returning economy, notwithstanding the fact that we have a very high incidence of COVID prevalent in the United States, consumption has been pretty good. The holiday, notwithstanding again restrictions, the holiday sales went up by close to 8.5%. And the third is, there's been inflation and price increase. So when you have price increase but contraction in interest rate, you definitely see the margins improvement. And this has been felt across all sectors, which is the reason why S&P has outperformed the much touted tech sector. So as we had predicted and as we had stated, is based on data, not any kind of miraculous statement here, that 2021 is going to be a bumper year, 28% growth for S&P is a very stellar performance.
Yes, indeed. And oil is trading at $76 and the 10-year T-bonds are at 1.47%. Sridharji, your things, and then we can wrap up today's program, sir.
I think that we will do an extensive coverage on markets, I think, if I'm correct, on Sunday, Sree, or one of the days. But the overall is that the markets have done well. There was questions around the interest rates. The 10-year bonds has held back below 1.5%. That's well. There is runaway oil prices. We have again covered this. Now the barrel of oil is around $76 or $78, as the case may be. So there has been a resurgence that has been felt in the price rises. But a U.S. consumer has been very stellar and supporting the economic growth. Whenever you have a strong U.S. economy on sentiments and data, you see that rubbing off in many of the global markets. That is why even Europe, which has witnessed tremendous growth, prolific growth in the cases, has seen very positive economic outcomes. We have talked about India, and some of the Asian nations has also seen resurgence in the consumer sentiments and expansion in the markets. And most of the markets have done well, but US and Europe are right on the top of the league tables.
And thank you very much, Sridharji. That's all we have for tonight's edition of news. We'll be back again very, very shortly. We'll be covering, like Sridharji said, a look at the markets, and stay tuned. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you. Have a good day. Namaskar. And again, thanks for all your support. And we look forward to your continued support as we advance our journey in 2020.